Undeclared wars are commonplace. Tragically, our government engages in preemptive war, otherwise known as aggression, with no complaints from the American people. Sadly, we have become accustomed to living with the illegitimate use of force by government. To develop a truly free society, the issue of initiating force must be understood and rejected.
What if sometimes, to love your country, you had to alter or abolish the government? What if Jefferson was right? What if that government is best which governs least? What if it is dangerous to be right when the government is wrong? What if it is better to perish fighting for freedom than to live as a slave? What if freedom's greatest hour of danger is now?
Hi, everyone. Judge Andrew Napolitano here for Judging Freedom. Today is Tuesday, February 17th, 2026. Matt Ho will be with us in just a moment on this intriguing question. Is an American war against Iran even winnable? But first this. Don't you just cringe when people say, "I told you so"? Sorry, I told you gold and silver would reap the benefits due to excessive money printing, inflation, and global uncertainty. It's here. It's happened. Gold and silver have reached all-time highs. Did you call Lear Capital and buy some? It's not too late. Experts are predicting higher prices ahead. Why? Nothing has changed. Geopolitical chaos, cost of living crises, and a weaker dollar are driving central banks to boost their gold reserves. Forecasts suggest gold could hit $6,000 an ounce and silver $200 an ounce. Even Morgan Stanley ditched the 60-40 rule for 60-20-20, putting 20% into precious metals. They're getting educated, and you should too. Call the best in the business and the people I trust. Lear Capital. Get their reports, get the facts, get some gold and silver. Tell them the judge sent you and get up to $20,000 in bonus gold or silver. Call 800-511-4620 or go to LearJudgeNap.com. Matt Ho, welcome here, my dear friend. Thanks for accommodating my schedule. Before we get into the military aspects of an American attack on Iran, a couple of other questions on which I'd like to pick your brain. Do you assign any significance to the arrival of the Russian deputy foreign minister at the trilateral negotiations between Russia, the United States, and Ukraine in Geneva tomorrow? I mean, heretofore it's been Trump's two real estate agents. I don't mean to demean them, but they're not diplomats, and a Russian money guy. Now, Sergei Lavrov, not sending himself, but his number one guy.
Yeah, I think there's a great deal of significance to that, Judge. Oh, and thank you for having me on, by the way. And that's been some criticism against both the Americans and the Russians that their negotiating teams have not been civil authorities. So either in the case of the Americans, they've not been members of the U.S. State Department or National Security Council or former members of the White House, but rather a good real estate buddy of Donald Trump and his son-in-law, and the same criticism of the Russians as well. And so I think this is significant in a sign from the Russians that we're moving past preliminary talks here, and now we're going to get into more of a working group or a phase where there are going to be giveaways and takeaways here that are significant or serious.
Do the Russians trust the Americans?
I don't believe they do, Judge, and they shouldn't, right? I mean, would you trust the Americans? Certainly not just this administration, but previous administrations.
I would not. You know, I might have said something differently when I was a judge. I might have said something differently when I was at Fox. But since I've been doing all of this and learning so much from you and all the others on here, the duplicity is monumental. And a lot of it you could just learn from your awareness of the news. Trump lures the Iranian negotiators to a negotiation. They're physically halfway there, and he bombs. Who would
Right.
trust them?
Exactly. And sticking with the Iran example, just the whole JCPOA, right?
Right.
Which the Russians were a signatory as well. The Russians, the Chinese, the EU, the British, the French, the Germans, they were all signatories to the JCPOA of 2015, which limited Iran's nuclear program, was a deal agreed upon by the entire world that this is the best way forward, something that the Iranians were fully invested in. And Trump ripped it up for no reason other than John Bolton and a bunch of neoconservative Zionist hacks told him to. But, I think it's even more than duplicity here, Judge. It's just the lack of wisdom, lack of foresight, the lack of just good sense that the Russians observe in the Americans. With their own issues with regarding Ukraine, the Russians know just as well as, say, you do, I do, all our colleagues on this program, the vast majority of the good folks who listen and watch your program, that, the number of American experts, former diplomats, former generals, former intelligence officers, et cetera, who have lined up and publicly said over the last 35 years that the expansion of NATO's eastward movement towards Russia, the encirclement of Russia, the attempts to bring Ukraine into NATO, on and on and on, will all provoke Russia, will all cause the reality that we're living in right now. And so the Russians look at the Americans and they say, look, all your people have been saying this for decades. Joe Biden, your director of Central Intelligence, Bill Burns, was one of the most aggressive in his warnings about U.S. provocations of Russia via Ukraine. And yet you choose to act as if they never said this. So how can you trust someone that can't even acknowledge what their own people are saying and then dismiss you as some type of conspiracy theorist if you bring it up? So I think there's a lot of good reasons why the Russians don't trust the Americans.
You mentioned Ukraine. Do you assign any significance to the Russians, starting with President Putin and continuing with Foreign Minister Lavrov, using this phrase Novorussia, New Russia, to describe Crimea and those 4 or 5 other oblasts? I mean, I know that word has been out there, but they have not been using it in public until last week. Is there significance to that?
I'm glad you're saying that, Judge, because I noticed that as well. And my thought was, well, maybe I just hadn't noticed it.
Maybe
it has
not been out there until 2 weeks ago.
Okay, yeah. I mean, because that is a phrase, a description of that part of Ukraine, of Southwest Russia, of that part of Eurasia, however you want to describe it, as that has long existed. This goes back hundreds of years, the use of that term by the old imperial Tsarist Russian Empire to describe that part of the world. I mean, but the strategic use of it now, the fact that they hadn't used it, Judge, and now they're saying it as we're reaching this point of the negotiations, as the Russians seem to be more serious or more interested in the negotiations, I think the Russians are keen on ending this war. I'm not in that camp that believes the Russians, despite what we see coming out of their commentaries, what their hardliners have to say, I don't believe the Russian government sees a prolonged war here as being in their interest. I was just talking to a friend of mine who just got back from 2 months in Russia. She's from there. And, there's things that are going well and things that are not going well. But the difficulties that this war puts on the Russians, such as having to shut down their internet because of the constant and daily Ukrainian drone attacks, something that we hardly hear about here in the West. But the Ukrainians are launching dozens, if not hundreds, of drones into Russia every day. And the countermeasures, as well as the losses the Russians are taking, sure, they can survive that. Sure, they are they have a capacity to endure. But does it make sense to continue to do so if you can negotiate a way out? And so I think that's where the Russians are now.
Let's talk about the military. What legitimate United States military purpose would be served by attacking Iran?
Legitimate, Judge?
Yes, legitimate. Is there one?
I don't believe there is one. I mean, what challenge do the Iranians present to the Americans? what threat of navigation on the seas, what threat of control of airspace, what threat to commerce or any type of trade do the Iranians present, what military forces, particularly now with essentially neutralization of Hamas and the Iraqi resistance, the capture of Syria by al-Sharaa and his al-Qaeda bunch. What threat do the Iranians pose militarily that the United States has to go to war with? None. This is all a war that has long been wanted by those in Washington, D.C., who want vengeance for 1979, as well as those who are, true believers in Israel first as the core of America's policy in the Middle East. So there's no military explanation for this. It's all political explanations.
Can the United States achieve legitimate military objectives, and what would those objectives be? I mean, this is not like kidnapping Maduro from his bedroom in the middle of the night. Iran is huge, mountainous, and sophisticated.
Right. Iran is, I don't know if people understand how big Iran is. And a lot of people want to make the comparison to Iraq, which, 23 years ago, we launched that disastrous war, that counterproductive, ruinous war. But Iran is 4 times larger than Iraq is. Iraq is about the size of California. So put it that way. Iran is 4 times larger than California. It's 4 times larger than Iraq. Its population is about 3 times or 3.5 times what Iraq's was in 2003. So it's just a massive country. So the idea of military conquest in the sense of an Afghanistan or an Iraq is simply impossible. We don't have the forces to do it. We don't have the bases to launch forces from. That's completely off the table. I don't think anyone but the most fervent crackpots in Washington, D.C. Even consider it. So what type of military objectives are there? Well, certainly the United States can destroy a lot. We can kill a lot. We can bomb Iranian military targets, political targets, infrastructure, economic targets, etc. But where does that get you? And so the question isn't about what are the military objectives, but the question is, what are the political objectives here? And I think those are either regime change, and if they can't get regime change, which I think is very doubtful, then what they want, then the second best thing, is to turn Iran into Syria a la 2015. That if we can't get our puppet into Iran, then nobody will be in charge. And if that causes the deaths of hundreds of thousands of Iranians, then so be it, because then at least Iran will be fighting itself and won't be in a position to have any impact or have any real presence throughout the Middle East, allowing Israel to dominate the Middle East, which allows America to dominate the Middle East.
RT is reporting former Israeli Prime Minister Naftali Bennett, if you remember him, he was once, this must have been very personal, he was once Netanyahu's chief of staff, and then he ousted him, became prime minister for maybe a year or two, has said Turkey is the new Iran. He called President Erdogan a sophisticated and dangerous adversary who seeks to encircle Israel.
That's a sentiment you've heard for a few years now, in particular over the last couple of years, as Israel's actions have progressed to the Middle East, as their desire to make greater Israel not simply just the conquest of Palestine, of southern Lebanon, of parts of Syria, but to make greater Israel be from the Nile to the Euphrates, as they say. That, of course, would bring in a lot more opponents, a lot more adversaries, step on many more toes than simply, finalizing, say, your conquest of the Palestinians, as abhorrent as it is to most in the region. You have the Turks, who are a growing power. They've been a growing power for decades now, it seems like, but they are a forceful actor. And you have a leadership in Turkey that views itself with a legacy, with a history, if you want to go, extend back through the Ottomans, but of course, with their own ambitions. And so this collision between NATO member Turkey, with the second largest military in NATO, and Israel is one, I think, that we've seen coming for a while. And the Israelis have not been shy about this. I think it was about a year ago, Judge, that the Knesset, the Israeli parliament, introduced or created a committee to study a future war with Turkey.
Well, Turkey's in NATO, so the Israelis attack Turkey, and Turkey invokes Article 5 of NATO. What the hell happens?
Well, Article 5, Judge, of course, is not mandatory.
Right.
It's something that people always get wrong about it. And watching over the last couple of years, where do you think the United States, as well as almost all of NATO, would fall on this issue of
on the side of their Zionist benefactors?
Right,
Not even
exactly.
not even a close call. Let's go back to manpower, material, and money. The United States and Israel against Iran. At what point do Russia and China get involved? China receives 1.4 million barrels of Iranian oil a day. How much long would they tolerate the Straits of Hormuz closed so that Trump can please Bibi?
Well, not just the Chinese, but the entire world, including those who don't receive Iranian oil because it's a global market. So if you shut off that oil to the Chinese from the Iranians, the Chinese aren't going to say, oh, okay, we're going to close down these EV factories over here and not build anything for a while until we get our oil back from Iran. No, they're going to buy their oil from other parts of the world, which means that, you're now competing against the Chinese for a smaller market. So the madness in this, in the sense of what it could induce. I think the Chinese, of course, would continue to support the Iranians in ways intended to not confront the Americans directly, because the Chinese don't have the military power to do so in an expeditionary way, right? So meaning that the Chinese Navy can't fight the American Navy in the Arabian Sea, in the Persian Gulf, in the Indian Ocean, et cetera. They're working on that. They're building out to that. And 20 years from now, they certainly will be able to, actually shorter than that. But I think what you see the Chinese and the Russians continuing to do is to provide support, particularly intelligence support, political support, as well as, this is an issue that I think many nations have around the world, Judge, is this understanding that we can't confront the United States in open warfare, particularly in a war where we have to project our power for an ally. It'd be very difficult for them to do so. And I think that's why you're seeing nations band together, nations create alternatives, not just economically, but I think militarily. One of the things in this region you hear a lot about, I'm reading constantly about now, seems to be this Pakistan, Saudi, Turk alliance. Sometimes the Egyptians are thrown in there. Right. I mean, so we're seeing not just in just one or two cases, but in many cases, nations trying to figure out ways to not just confront, but to endure or defeat the Americans. And this, of course, will take time. But like I think the Chinese watching this have to say to themselves, just as with Venezuela, where the Americans are capturing cargo ships and tankers that are owned by China, and the Chinese aren't able to do anything about it militarily. The Chinese, I think, are saying, look, we no longer have to look at our military as defensive or as at least just a regional military, but as a global military. And I think 10, 15 years time, China will have that capacity, and it will be a capacity that they built out because of the United States actions.
All right. So talk to me about the Iran military and the American military. I think we could probably rule out boots on the ground. This is not going to be a land invasion, right?
Right. It will be. No, we simply don't have the forces, and we have no place to invade from. Maybe 10 years or so ago, a dozen years ago, the idea was that we could invade Iran via Afghanistan and Iraq as we were occupying both countries. And that certainly was a fear that the Iranians had. And certainly this idea, I can tell you from being in Iraq 20 years ago now, this idea of having a permanent presence was geared towards Iran more than anything else. But the United States would use the package that we've seen used before: airstrikes, drone strikes, cruise missile strikes. They would use their commandos. They would use cyber attacks. But the main thing that they would attempt to do, I believe, is to tie all that into sectarian uprisings. So the idea of using the Kurds, the Baluchs, the Turkmens, trying to get the Azerbaijanis from the north of Iran to become involved in some way. But, the Sunni Arabs along the Gulf Coast, for them to have an uprising. That would be, I think, the way the Americans would go about this in order to try and fracture the Iranian state, either to an attempt for regime change, or, as I said before, just to cause chaos, instability, just to make it so that Iranians are killing Iranians, and the Iranian state is totally invested in trying to maintain power, trying to create some control, trying to maintain control, and trying not to let it spin into a civil war. And of course, a civil war, again, similar to Syria, I think is very much the mindset of those in Tel Aviv and Washington, D.C., as what they would like to see carried out. One aspect of this, too, is I think the Americans would pursue a decapitation or an assassination attempts. We saw the Israelis come close to assassinating the Iranian president. Certainly the idea, if you can't assassinate these leaders, at least drive them underground so that they're incommunicado. And then that causes problems, of course, with the government. But more importantly, having, say, the Ayatollah in an underground bunker when people haven't heard from him for weeks, that causes real problems along the population. And so I think that's one of the avenues the Americans will pursue.
Well, here is the Ayatollah yesterday, and maybe you can tell me what he's talking about. It sounds as though he's talking about some new super weapon fired from a submarine. Here it is, Chris, number 15.
We recently made the decision to send a powerful warship directly towards the coast of Iran. Now, it is true that a modern warship is certainly a very dangerous and formidable device, but what is even more dangerous than the warship itself is the specific type of advanced weapon that has the capability to send it straight to the dark bottom of the sea.
Does he have a weapon that has the capability of sending an American aircraft carrier, quote, to the bottom of the dark sea?
I believe they likely do. And the more important thing is, what do the Americans believe? And I believe the Americans believe that as well. Look, the Yemenis, the Ansar Allah, the Houthis in Yemen, chased both the Navy expeditionary forces that the Biden and Trump administrations put into the Red Sea, right? So the American Navy was defeated not once but twice by the Yemenis in the last couple of years. The Yemenis came close enough to the American aircraft carrier to scare the hell out of it, to cause it to take pretty drastic evasive maneuvers. The understanding, the conventional wisdom is that the Iranians are a couple of orders above and beyond where the Yemenis are in terms of their weaponry. We saw some evidence of this in the last year. The attacks, the counterattacks by Iran against Israel. Some of their missiles did hit the air bases. Some of their missiles did hit the areas of Tel Aviv where Israel's army has its command and control bunkers underground. So we know they have accuracy. We know they have a lot of them. The idea would be that fire enough so that the Israeli and the American missile defense interceptors run out, which is what we saw happening back in June during the 12-day war. Just a question of, do they have that much? And so we have to be cautious here about estimations on what the Iranians have, because we simply don't know. And for people who want to argue with that, I'll say, hey, look, whatever happened to the hundreds and hundreds of thousands of missiles and drones and rockets that Hezbollah supposedly had, right? We never saw those materialize. So our understanding of what the Iranians have capability-wise as well as capacity-wise is pretty limited, but we can gather from what we've seen the last few years that there is an ability for both the Americans to potentially suffer defeat here, as well as for the Iranians to outlast, in terms of an attrition warfare, the Israelis and the Americans, because we saw that happen last year in the 12-day war. So like anything else, like with any other aspect of war, Judge, the only thing I'll say with certainty is that I absolutely disagree with those who are certain about the outcome of it. Only thing I can say. Yeah.
Very good. Very good. An excellent conversation, Matt. Thank you very much. Thanks for letting me take you across the board on a variety of topics. Thank you for being here. We'll look forward to seeing you next week, my friend.
All right. Thank you, Judge.
Sure. Coming up at 3:00 on all of this with the intriguing article she posted at Judge Knapp and elsewhere. What if Trump starts World War III? Colonel Karen Kwiatkowski, Judge Napolitano for Judging Freedom.